2 in the morning at a run-down private clinic on the outskirts of Southside Chicago, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. The silence shattered as a black SUV screeched to a halt outside the entrance, its tires screaming against the wet asphalt loud enough to send chills down anyone's spine. The door burst open and a man was dragged inside, his body leaving a trail of crimson across the cracked linoleum floor. His tailored Italian suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, was now soaked through with blood that had not yet stopped flowing. Dominic Vittorio, 37 years old, the head of the Vittorio crime family, one of the most feared and powerful names in Chicago's underworld, now hung between the arms of his men like a puppet with its strings cut, teetering on the razor-thin line between life and death. Dominic's hand gripped the edge of the examination table, his voice grinding out through clenched teeth as if every word cost him another drop of blood. "Just do it fast. I don't care about the pain anymore." There was no doctor in sight, only one woman rushing in from the back room, a woman in faded scrubs with dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes, her hands calloused but steady as stone. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp and urgent. 2 gunshot wounds, one in the shoulder, one in the abdomen. The man beside Dominic answered, his own hands trembling as he pointed a gun at her. "Fix him, or you die with him." The woman did not flinch. She did not beg. She simply looked at the gun, then at the dying man, and said in a voice so calm it was almost terrifying, "Put that away if you want him to live. Shaking hands cannot save anyone." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed a medical kit and knelt beside Dominic, her worn combat boots scraping against the floor, the same boots she had worn through 3 deployments in Afghanistan. As she cut open his shirt to assess the wounds, the overhead light caught something on her wrist, a small tattoo of coordinates, the exact location where her husband had proposed to her 6 years ago, and around her neck hung a simple wedding ring on a thin chain, the ring of a man who would never come home again. Dominic saw them through the haze of pain, his eyes narrowing not just from agony but from recognition, because he had seen this woman before, 2 years ago, in a bar on the west side, on the worst night of his life, and she had said something to him that he had never been able to forget. Her name was Elena Ward, 27 years old, a former Army combat medic, a widow, a single mother living in a broken-down van with her 5-year-old daughter who had not spoken a single word in 2 years. This is the story of a night that changed everything, of a woman who had lost all hope yet still chose to save a life, and of a ruthless Mafia boss who was about to learn that some debts cannot be repaid with money. If you love stories full of emotion and unexpected turns, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss the stories we bring you every single day. And the question remains, where did Dominic meet Elena Ward before, and what did she say to him that night that still haunts him to this day? Elena did not waste a single second as she tore away what remained of the blood-soaked shirt, exposing 2 wounds where dark blood was seeping from Dominic's body, her eyes sweeping over every detail with the cold precision of someone who had seen hundreds of similar injuries on the battlefield. The gunshot to the shoulder was a through-and-through wound that had missed bone and artery, and she could handle it, but the wound to the abdomen was the real problem because the bullet was still inside, and if it had perforated the intestine, Dominic would die of infection before dawn. She turned to Marco and her voice was calm, as if she were reciting a cooking recipe, and told him she needed saline, gauze, hemostatic clamps, and anything that could be used as anesthetic in this clinic, and that he needed to go now. Marco stood there for a second, with his gun still in his hand and suspicion filling his eyes. She looked straight back at him without blinking, and told him that every second he stood there was another second. His boss was losing blood and asked if he wanted to explain to the rest of the family that the man had died because he refused to fetch bandages. Marco swallowed, shoved the gun into his waistband, and ran. Elena turned back to Dominic, who was shivering, his lips pale, cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, signs she knew all too well of hemorrhagic shock, as the body began shutting down one system at a time. She took his hand and her voice changed, no longer cold but warmer and softer, as if she were speaking to a frightened child, telling him to look at her, not to close his eyes, asking if he could hear her, and to keep looking at her. Dominic opened his eyes, and his gray gaze clouded with pain found her brown eyes. "Good," she said. "Keep looking at me like that and tell me something. Anything. What do you like to eat?" Dominic's knuckles turned white as he gripped the table, his body trembling violently from the shock. He tried to focus, to speak, but only a ragged gasp escaped his throat. Pizza," he forced out through gritted teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. "Chicago style, deep dish." The pain was blinding. robbing him of breath, but he held onto her voice like a lifeline. Elena nodded and kept talking as she worked, saying Chicago pizza, and that she had heard it was thicker than a book, and that the first time she went to Chicago she ordered one and could not finish it, and that was 2 years ago. She chose those words deliberately, and saw a flicker of recognition cut through the haze of pain in Dominic's eyes. He remembered. Marco came back carrying an armful of medical supplies and set them down beside her. She did not look up and simply began arranging the tools in the order she needed. There was no proper anesthetic, only a small amount of lidocaine, not enough for a surgery like this. She looked at Dominic and was honest with him, as she told him she would have to remove the bullet, and it would hurt more than anything he had ever experienced, and that he could bite down on something or scream if he wanted because she did not care, but he could not pass out because if he did, he would not wake up again. Dominic nodded, a small movement but enough for Elena to begin. She worked with absolute focus, her calloused hands moving with the precision of an artist. She cleaned the wound, injected lidocaine around the area, then inserted the clamp to search for the bullet. Dominic roared and his body arched off the table, but Marco leapt forward and pinned his shoulders down. Elena did not stop, did not shake, did not hesitate. She had done this dozens of times under fire in Kandahar in makeshift medical tents with desert sand blowing into her eyes and gunfire and explosions all around. Compared to that, this was a quiet night. Her fingers felt the bullet, a cold piece of metal lying less than a centimeter from the small intestine. Lucky, she thought. He was lucky. She clamped the bullet and drew it out slowly, carefully so as not to tear any more tissue. Dominic screamed once, and then went silent, his body trembling but his eyes still open. The bullet dropped onto the metal tray with a dry clink. Elena did not pause to celebrate and immediately began stitching, each stitch precise and steady as she pulled the edges of the wound back together. She worked for the next 2 hours, treating the shoulder wound, administering fluids to replace the blood he had lost, monitoring his pulse and blood pressure with the crude equipment available in the clinic. Marco stood in the corner watching in silence. He had seen many things in his life and had seen people kill for money, for power, for hatred, but he had never seen anyone work like this woman. Not for money, not out of fear, but simply because it was what she knew how to do. And through all 3 hours her hands did not tremble even once. The first light of dawn began to seep through the dirty glass windows of the clinic, washing the room in a pale yellow haze as if the whole world were waking from a nightmare. 3 hours had passed since the black SUV had screeched into the parking lot. 3 hours of blood, sweat, stitches, and whispered words meant to keep one man from letting go. Dominic lay on the examination table, his chest rising and falling steadily, his pulse stabilized, his blood pressure slowly returning to normal. He would live. Elena stood beside the table for another minute, her eyes locked on the heart monitor, counting each beat as if she did not trust what she was seeing. 72 beats per minute. Steady, he would live, and then suddenly, as if someone had cut the string holding her upright, Elena sank down onto the floor, her back against the cold wall, her knees drawn to her chest, and for the first time in 3 hours she allowed herself to tremble, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm, the tremors starting in her hands and spreading to her shoulders, her chest, all the way down to her toes inside her worn combat boots. This was not just the bitter chill of the unheated clinic seeping into her bones. This was fear she had held back for 3 hours, adrenaline draining from her body and leaving behind a vast emptiness. Marco stood in the corner watching her. His gaze had changed. No longer the dismissive look of a gangster staring at an ordinary night shift nurse. In his eyes now was something close to respect, close to awe, as if he had just witnessed something he could not explain. He said nothing, simply shrugged off the leather jacket he was wearing and tossed it gently toward Elena. She did not pick it up and did not refuse it, letting it lie beside her like a silent thank you. Elena looked down at her hands. Dominic's blood had dried, staining every line of her palms, every edge of her nails, turning her hands into an abstract portrait of life and death. She had saved him. She had done it. But instead of triumph, instead of relief, all she felt was a vast hollow in her chest, because looking at these blood-soaked hands, she could not help but remember another night, 2 years earlier, when these same hands had been just as bloody, but with Daniel's blood. That night she had tried as well, had used every skill she possessed, had begged him not to close his eyes, not to leave her, but that night she had failed. The bullet had torn straight through Daniel's heart, and no skill, no miracle, could save a heart that had stopped beating. She remembered the feel of his blood slipping through her fingers, remembered his final breath, remembered the way the light slowly left his eyes while she screamed his name. Elena closed her eyes, trying to push those images away. She had saved Dominic Vittorio, a mafia boss, a killer, a man she owed nothing and had no reason to save. But she could not save Daniel Ward, her husband, the father of her child, the only man who had ever looked at her as if she were his entire world. Was it fair? Did it mean anything? Elena did not know. She only knew that her hands could save a stranger but not the man she loved, and that was a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. Soundless, without sobbing, just silent, salty drops falling onto her nurse's uniform soaked with sweat. Outside the window, dawn was rising over Chicago, gilding the distant high-rise buildings in gold. A new day was beginning, but for Elena the darkness had never truly left. A few hours later, when the midday sun had replaced the light of dawn, and the small clinic room was filled with a pale golden glow, filtering through dust suspended in the air, Dominic Vittorio opened his eyes, the world before him blurred as if seen through frosted glass, everything smeared and distant. He blinked, once, twice, 3 times, trying to regain focus. The yellowed ceiling crisscrossed with cracks slowly came into view, then the old fluorescent light flickering weakly overhead, then the hospital, green walls with paint peeling away in patches. This was not his penthouse. This was not anywhere he had ever known. And then memory crashed back like a tidal wave. Gunshots exploding in a dark alley, the tearing pain as bullets ripped through his body, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, and the face of a woman bending over him with eyes strangely calm. Dominic tried to sit up, but pain from the wound in his abdomen tore a groan from his throat and forced him back down. "Do not move," a voice came from his right, and Dominic turned his head toward it. She was sitting on an old plastic chair beside the bed, holding a thin medical file, her eyes fixed on the numbers glowing on the heart monitor. Elena Ward. He remembered her name, even though at the time he had been drowning in pain so deep he thought he would die. He remembered the way she ordered Marco to put the gun away, remembered her calloused yet steady hands cutting his shirt open, remembered her voice forcing him to talk about Chicago pizza to keep him from passing out. Now in the daylight he could see her more clearly. She was thin, so thin her collarbones jutted sharply beneath pale skin. The dark circles beneath her eyes were deep, as if she had not slept properly in months, perhaps years. Her brown hair was hastily tied into a loose bun, revealing early streaks of gray at her temples, strands that should not have appeared on a woman still so young. The nurse's uniform she wore was faded from too many washings. The collar frayed, and Dominic noticed a neatly sewn patch at the left elbow. But what caught his attention most was her boots, old military combat boots with cracked leather and soles worn nearly smooth, yet carefully laced and polished. Even though the polish could no longer hide the scars, they were the boots of a soldier, and no one wore soldier's boots to work a night shift as a nurse, unless those boots meant something far deeper. Then he saw the ring, a simple silver wedding band with no diamond and no gemstone, hanging from a thin chain around her neck, resting directly over her heart, and the way she sometimes unconsciously lifted a hand to touch it told Dominic that the ring was no longer worn on her finger because the man who had given it was no longer among the living. And finally he saw the tattoo, a small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, numbers and letters forming a set of geographic coordinates. Not the kind of tattoo meant for beauty, not the kind worn by young women seeking attention, but the kind carved into the skin by someone determined to mark a place, a moment, a memory they never wanted to forget. "Who are you?" Dominic asked, his voice rough with dryness. Elena did not look at him, her focus still on the numbers on the monitor. "Just a night shift nurse," she replied, her voice flat and still like an unbroken lake. Dominic wanted to smile but lacked the strength. He had lived in the underworld long enough to know when someone was lying. A night shift nurse did not know how to extract a bullet from a man's abdomen. A night shift nurse did not have hands steady as stone with a gun pointed at her head. A night shift nurse did not wear combat boots and did not have the eyes of someone who had seen too much death. He watched her closely, digging through memories still hazy from pain medication. And then suddenly, like lightning tearing through darkness, he remembered. This face, these eyes, this voice. He had met her before, not in any hospital or clinic, but in a rundown bar on the west side, 2 years earlier, on the worst night of his life. "I know you," Dominic said slowly, each word deliberate as if confirming it to himself. 2 years ago, a bar on the west side? You were the woman that night." For the first time since he had opened his eyes, Elena stopped. The pen in her hand froze in midair. She still did not turn to look at him, but Dominic could see her back stiffen, Her shoulders tighten as if bracing for a blow. Silence stretched between them, heavy and thick like the air before a storm, and the question hung in the small room, waiting for an answer that perhaps neither of them was ready to face. 2 years earlier, on a winter night in Chicago when the cold wind cut into skin and bone and snow began to fall, whitening the empty streets, Murphy's Bar on the west side was the kind of place people went when they did not want to be recognized. A place with dim lights, torn seats, and an old owner who never asked a customer's name. And Dominic Vittorio walked in that night with blood not yet fully dry beneath his fingernails, having just completed what he had spent 12 years preparing for, avenging Sophia, his little sister who had been kidnapped and murdered at the age of 12 by a rival family. 12 years of climbing rung up the ladder of power, building an empire, gathering loyal men, waiting for the right moment, and tonight he had strangled with his own hands the last man on the list of those who had taken his sister's life. It is done, he thought, yet instead of satisfaction, instead of the peace he had imagined, all he felt was a vast emptiness in his chest, as if someone had carved out part of his soul and left behind a black hole nothing could fill. Dominic sat at the bar and tapped his fingers on the chipped wood. "The most expensive whiskey you have," he told the bartender in a voice cold as ice. "The whole bottle." Then he pulled out a thick wad of cash and tossed it onto the counter without counting. The bartender looked at the money, looked at the expensive suit, looked at the gray eyes, cold and lifeless like a snake's, and silently placed a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan in front of him. Dominic did not use a glass. He opened the bottle and drank straight from it, letting the amber liquid burn down his throat, hoping it would also burn away the emptiness gnawing at him from the inside. And that was when he saw her, a woman sitting alone in the corner, a cheap drink in front of her barely touched, wearing an old oversized military jacket, brown hair loose and tangled, and her eyes red and swollen as if she had cried for a long time but was forcing herself not to cry anymore. She looked like a small injured bird trying not to let its wings break. Normally, Dominic would never have noticed a woman like that. He was used to glamorous beauties, luxurious figures drawn to him by money and power. But this was not a normal night, and something in her eyes drew him in. A pain he seemed to recognize, an emptiness that mirrored his own. Dominic took the whiskey bottle and walked over, sitting across from her without asking permission. "You look like you just lost the whole world," he said, his voice still cold but with something softer buried deep beneath it. Elena looked up at him. She was not afraid, not cautious, not curious like most women when faced with a man like him. She simply looked at him with tired eyes, as if she was too exhausted to feel anything at all. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice rough. "You look like you just gained the whole world and have no idea what to do with it." Dominic froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever seen through him like that. He was Dominic Vittorio, the name that made all of Chicago tremble, the man who held hundreds of lives in his hands. Yet this woman looked at him as if he were just a pitiful man, trying to hide pain behind a cold mask. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Elena shrugged. "I do not care." And that answer intrigued Dominic even more. He poured whiskey into her empty glass, though she had not asked. "I just finished the thing I spent my whole life preparing for," he said. Not knowing why he suddenly wanted to confide in a stranger. "I waited 12 years and now it is over. What do you think I should feel?" Elena looked at the glass, then back at him. "I do not know. My husband died 2 weeks ago. Shot right in front of me and my daughter. She is 3 years old. She saw everything, and since then she has not spoken a single word. My mother was just diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and as for me," she paused, took a trembling breath, "I have exactly $73 in my account, and I do not know how I will feed my child tomorrow." She said it all in a flat voice, not begging for pity, not complaining, simply stating facts, and that calmness felt to Dominic like a fist slamming into his chest. He looked down at the money on the bar, at the bottle of whiskey worth 10 times most people's monthly income, and suddenly it all felt meaningless. He could give her money, he thought. He could throw a few $1,000s at her and it would mean nothing to him. But before he could speak, Elena stood up. "Do you know what keeps me alive?" she asked, looking straight into his eyes. "Not money, not hope. Responsibility. I am not allowed to die because someone needs me." She pulled on her military jacket and prepared to leave. Then she stopped, turned back one last time, and said the words Dominic would never forget. "You have everything money can buy, but you have no one who needs you. That is what real poverty is." Elena Ward walked out of the bar, leaving Dominic alone with an expensive bottle of whiskey and a question he could not answer. And that night, for the first time in 12 years, Dominic Vittorio could not sleep. Not because of the men he had killed, but because of the eyes of a stranger who had seen straight through his soul and named the one thing he had spent his life running from, the absolute loneliness of a man who had everything yet belonged to no one. To understand the woman who spoke those words in the bar that night, one must go further back in time, to a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Detroit where Elena Ward grew up amid the smell of damp walls, the sound of rats running inside them, and the quiet sobs of her mother each night when she thought her daughter was asleep. Elena was 5 years old when her father left. She did not remember much about him, only the smell of cheap cigarettes, the sound of a door slamming on an autumn morning, and her mother's face when she realized he would never return. He left no farewell letter, no money, nothing but a mountain of debt, and a little girl with the same brown eyes as his. Margaret, Elena's mother, was a strong woman, in the way only those pushed to the edge by life can be strong. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses for wealthy suburban families during the day and waiting tables at a 24-hour diner at night. Elena grew up accustomed to waking in an empty apartment, making her own breakfast from whatever was left in the refrigerator, walking to school alone because there was no one to take her. She learned not to ask, not to complain, not to dream of distant things. But there was one thing Elena was always good at: learning. She devoured every book in the school library, from novels to science texts, from history to medicine, and by the time she was 16, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to become a nurse, to save lives, to do something meaningful with this short life. Elena graduated high school with the highest grades in her class and earned a scholarship to nursing school. But the scholarship did not cover everything. There were still books, food, living expenses. Her mother had aged too quickly, her back bent from years of exhausting labor, and Elena could not bear the thought of forcing her to work one more day just to support her. So at 19 years old, Elena Ward joined the United States Army. The Army paid her tuition, provided housing, and in return Elena served. She was trained as a combat medic, battlefield medical personnel who ran into gunfire to save their comrades. Elena discovered she had been born for this work. While others panicked, she remained calm. While blood flowed and bullets flew, her hands were steady as stone. She was deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, and each time she returned, she carried new scars, not on her body but in her soul. She had seen friends die in her arms, had heard the final screams of boys barely out of their teens calling for their mothers. She learned how to lock the pain away, push it into the deepest corner of her mind, and keep working. Then she met Daniel Ward. Daniel was an infantry soldier, tall and lean, with a gentle smile and eyes as blue as a summer sky. He was not polished like the men in movies, did not know how to speak in grand romantic phrases or give expensive gifts, but he knew how to make Elena laugh after a 12-hour shift soaked in blood, knew how to hold her when nightmares came in the middle of the night, knew how to look at her as if she were the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. Daniel proposed to Elena in a place with nothing romantic about it, just outside the medical tent in Kandahar, on a blistering afternoon with desert dust swirling through the air. He had no diamond ring, only a simple silver band bought from a street vendor at the local market. He knelt on the sand and said he did not have much money, no prestigious family, nothing but the love he had for her. But if she would marry him, he promised to spend his entire life making her happy. Elena cried when she said yes, and she tattooed the coordinates of that place onto her wrist, so she would never forget the moment she felt she belonged to someone. They married in a small ceremony on the military base, with only a few fellow soldiers as witnesses. No elaborate wedding dress, no lavish celebration. Just 2 people in love and a vow to stay together for life. 1 year later, Lily was born, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's brown hair, and her first cry melted every wall Elena had built around her heart for so many years. For the first time in her life, Elena felt she truly had a family. They were discharged from the military, left the army, and moved to Chicago with dreams of an ordinary life. Daniel found work as a security guard at a shopping center. Elena worked as a nurse at a small hospital. They rented a modest but cozy apartment, where Lily took her first unsteady steps and babbled her first words for mother and father. Life was not wealthy, but it was full of laughter, and Elena believed that at last, after all those years of hardship, fate had finally smiled upon her. She was wrong. Destiny had never truly let her go. That fateful night began like so many ordinary nights before it. Elena had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital, exhausted to the bone yet lighthearted knowing that Daniel and Lily were waiting for her at home. She drove back to their small apartment, imagining the simple dinner Daniel had promised to cook, and Lily's giggles when she scooped her up and spun her around. But when she arrived, Daniel told her they were out of milk, and Lily needed milk before bed. He said he would run to the convenience store and be back quickly. Just 5 minutes. Elena was too tired and offered to go herself, but Daniel insisted, telling her to rest with that gentle smile she loved, down to every wrinkle. He said he would take Lily so she could get some fresh air, and so they left. Daniel lifting Lily into the car and promising to be back before Elena even had time to miss them. She stood at the window watching their old car disappear around the corner, unaware that it was the last time she would ever see her husband alive. 20 minutes later, Elena's phone rang. An unfamiliar number, she answered, and her world collapsed. There had been gunshots at the convenience store on the corner of Oak and Main, the caller said. There was a man critically injured and a child crying. Elena did not remember how she drove there. She only remembered jumping out of the car and seeing Daniel lying in a pool of blood in front of the store window. An armed robber had burst in just as Daniel was paying, and when Daniel tried to protect the people around him, the man shot him. The bullet tore straight through his chest, missing the heart by less than a centimeter. Elena ran to her husband, her combat medic hands automatically pressing on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, even as she knew deep down it was already too late. Daniel's blood flowed through her fingers, warm and thick, and she could feel life leaving his body second by second. Daniel looked at her, his blue eyes slowly losing their light. He could not say much, only whispered his final words. "Take care of Lily, promise me." And then he was gone, right there in her arms beneath the dim yellow streetlights and the distant wail of an ambulance that arrived too late. Elena did not scream. She did not cry out. She simply sat there holding her husband's body, while silent tears streamed down her face. Then she heard it, a small, fragile cry from inside the car, parked a few meters away. Lily, her daughter, sitting in the back seat, wide-eyed and staring through the glass, and Elena realized with absolute horror that her child had seen everything. Lily, only 3 years old, had watched her father get shot, had seen him fall into a pool of blood, had seen her mother clutch a lifeless body and weep. From that night on, Lily never spoke another word. It was not that she could not speak. Doctors examined her and confirmed that her vocal cords and brain were perfectly normal. She simply refused to speak, retreating into herself like a snail withdrawing into its shell, her once bright blue eyes now permanently shadowed by a sorrow no 3-year-old should ever bear. Selective mutism, the doctors called it, trauma-induced. She needed intensive therapy, specialized child psychologists, constant care, and all of it required money. Vast amounts of money Elena did not have. Daniel's death insurance barely covered the funeral and a few months of rent. After that, Elena was on her own. She worked 16 hours a day, taking every shift she could find, leaving Lily with cheap babysitters she never fully trusted. Then her mother fell ill. Margaret was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, and chemotherapy was brutally expensive. Elena borrowed money from banks, from predatory lenders, and when there was nowhere left to turn, she went to Viktor Kozlov, a notorious loan shark on the south side, a Russian man with eyes cold as ice and a smile that never reached them. He lent Elena $30,000 with an interest rate he never bothered to explain, and when Elena could not pay on time, the debt grew like a malignant tumor. 30,000 became 50,000. 50,000 became 80,000. Kozlov began sending men after her, large men with threats that grew clearer by the day. Elena lost her hospital job when a patient died during her shift, and though it was not her fault, though the system had failed rather than her, she was blamed, investigated, and had her license suspended. With no legitimate hospital work left, she took low-paying jobs, nursing in cheap private clinics, cleaning offices during the day, waiting tables in bars on weekends. She lost their apartment when she could no longer afford rent and was thrown onto the street with her 5-year-old daughter who still did not speak. They lived in an old van Elena bought for $500, parking in public lots and moving every night to avoid being chased away by police. Elena went hungry so Lily could eat, slept 3 hours a night, woke from nightmares of Daniel, of blood, of gunshots, her body wasting away, her mind exhausted, and there were nights, the longest and darkest nights, when she thought about ending it all. But every time that thought surfaced, she looked at Lily sleeping beside her, eyes shut tight yet lashes still wet even in sleep, and she remembered her promise to Daniel, "Take care of Lily, promise me." Elena had promised, and she would not break that promise, even if it meant living in hell. Returning to the present, 3 days after the fateful night at the clinic, Dominic had been moved to a safe house on the outskirts of Chicago, a place whose address was known only to the most trusted members of the family. His wounds were healing slowly but surely, and for the first time he could sit up without feeling as though someone were tearing his abdomen apart. Yet his mind found no rest. For 3 days, the image of Elena Ward had haunted him relentlessly. Her tired yet steady brown eyes, her calloused yet gentle hands, and the words she had spoken 2 years earlier echoed in his head like a curse. He had no one who needed him. That was real poverty. Dominic summoned Marco to his room. "I want to know everything about that woman," he said, his voice still weak, but his gaze as sharp as ever. "Elena Ward. Everything from the day she was born until now. Do not miss a single detail." Marco nodded and disappeared. 2 days later, he returned with a thick file in his hands. He set it down on the table beside Dominic's bed, his face carrying something Dominic had never seen on his most loyal lieutenant before, something close to sorrow. "Boss," he said, his voice noticeably lower, "I think you should read this yourself." Dominic opened the file and began to read. Elena Marie Ward, 27 years old, born in Detroit, Michigan. Father left when she was 5. Mother worked 2 jobs to raise her, graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a nursing scholarship, enlisted in the military at 19 to cover tuition, trained as a combat medic, deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, awarded commendations for bravery, married to Daniel Thomas Ward, also a veteran. 1 daughter named Lily. Daniel was shot and killed during an armed robbery 2 years ago in front of his wife and daughter. Daughter Lily, now 5, stopped speaking after psychological trauma, diagnosed with selective mutism. Elena's mother Margaret diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, currently undergoing chemotherapy at a low-cost medical facility. Total current debt $80,000, including hospital bills, credit card debt, and high-interest loans from Viktor Kozlov. Nursing license suspended following a medical incident under investigation. Currently holding 3 jobs: night shift nurse at Chen Private Clinic, daytime office cleaner, weekend bar server. Current residence none. Living in a 1994 van parked at public lots around the South Side with her daughter. Dominic read every page, every line, every detail. He read about the nights Elena went hungry so her child could eat, about the times Kozlov sent men to threaten her, demanding money or other things. He read about her waking at 4 in the morning every day and going to sleep at midnight, day after day without a single day off. He read about a life that he, with all his wealth and power, could not imagine. When he finished, Dominic sat in silence for a long time. The file resting on his lap felt heavy, as if it carried an entire lifetime of suffering. He thought of his penthouse with its sweeping view of Chicago, of the luxury cars in his garage, of expensive meals he barely bothered to finish. Then he thought of Elena, a woman living in a van, drowning in debt, with a daughter who could not speak, a mother slowly dying, abandoned by the world, and that woman, in the midst of her own private hell, had spent 3 hours saving the life of a stranger, without asking who he was, without demanding payment, without bargaining conditions, simply saving him because it was what she knew how to do, because it was who she was. Dominic closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years he felt something inside himself that he had believed long dead. It was not quite shame, not quite guilt. It was something close to respect, mixed with a pain he did not know how to name. 1 week after reading Elena's file, Dominic was strong enough to leave his bed, the wound still aching and every step forcing him to clench his teeth. But he could not wait any longer. There was a debt he needed to repay, and Dominic Vittorio never owed anyone anything. He ordered Marco to prepare $100,000 in cash, packed into a black leather briefcase. The amount meant nothing to him, just a small fraction of what he could withdraw without a second thought, but for Elena it could change everything: clear her debts, pay for her mother's treatment, rent a decent apartment for the 2 of them, and begin life again. Marco drove him to the South Side, parking a block away. Dominic ordered him to stay in the car. This was personal, and he wanted to face it alone. Every step from the car to the parking lot sent a dull ache through his healing abdomen, but he pushed through. According to the file, Elena usually parked her van at night near Marquette Park, a place with enough streetlights to feel safe yet quiet enough that no one asked questions. He found the van immediately. It stood out painfully in the parking lot. A 1994 Dodge Caravan with faded, blotchy silver paint and windows covered in colorful paper stars that Lily must have made. The metal hull offered no protection against the biting Chicago wind, the windows frosted over from the inside, trapping the freezing cold within. It was a mobile home for a mother and child, cramped and temporary, yet kept clean, still bearing small touches that showed someone was trying to turn it into a home. Dominic stepped out of his car with the briefcase in hand and knocked gently on the van door. A few seconds of silence passed, and then the door opened. Elena looked at him, her brown eyes not surprised at all, as if she had known he would come. She wore an old t-shirt and sleep pants, her hair loose and tangled, clearly just woken from a short sleep snatched between shifts. "You should not be here," she said calmly. "This area is not safe for someone like you." Dominic almost smiled. He, the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago, being warned about safety by a woman living in a van. But he did not smile. Instead, he lifted the briefcase. "I came to thank you," he said, setting it down on the van step. $100,000. Enough to pay off your debts and more. Consider it payment for what you did." Elena looked down at the case and then back at him. She did not touch it. "I did not save you for money," she said, her voice still calm but with a sharp edge beneath it. "I know," Dominic replied. "But you need it. I read your file. I know your situation. This money could change your life." Elena was silent for a moment as if weighing something. Then she opened the van door wider. Revealing the interior, Dominic saw a thin mattress on the floor, a few old pillows, a bag of neatly folded clothes in the corner, and on the mattress a little girl sleeping, Lily, curled up like a kitten, brown hair spread across the pillow, lips parted in sleep. In her arms she clutched a battered old teddy bear, its fur faded and nearly gone, yet held as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The child looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that outside this van was a world that had taken her father and was trying to crush her mother every day. "What do you think I need?" Elena asked, her voice suddenly trembling, no longer calm but filled with pain. "What do you think money can buy?" She pointed at Lily. "I need my daughter to speak again. It has been 2 years since she said a single word. 2 years since I heard her call me mother. Can you buy that?" Dominic could not answer. "I need my mother to recover," Elena continued, her voice breaking. "She is dying slowly in a terrible medical facility because I cannot afford proper treatment. Can you buy her life?" She paused, drew a deep breath, struggling to contain the emotions rising in her chest. "I need time to turn back. I need to stop my husband from walking into that store that night. I need to hold him one more time, to hear him say my name one more time. Can you buy that, Dominic Vittorio? Can you buy back the husband who died in my arms?" Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Dominic stood there with the $100,000 briefcase at his feet, and for the first time in his life he truly felt poor. Not poor in money, but poor in something far deeper, something money could never buy. Elena bent down, picked up the briefcase, and gently placed it back into Dominic's hands. "Keep your money," she said, her voice no longer angry, only profoundly tired. "I have lived without it for 2 years. I will keep living." Then she closed the van door softly so as not to wake Lily. Dominic stood there for a long moment, staring at the old van with paper stars taped to its windows. Then he turned and walked away, the briefcase still heavy in his hand, but not as heavy as the weight pressing down on his chest. Dominic Vittorio was not accustomed to being refused. In his world, money could buy everything: loyalty, silence, even human lives. Yet Elena Ward had turned down $100,000 as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper, and that refusal lodged itself in his mind, not as anger but as something he could not name, a curiosity laced with respect he had never felt for anyone. That night Dominic summoned Marco to his office and spoke Viktor Kozlov, the loan shark who has been hounding Elena Ward. Find him, pay off everything she owes, and make sure he never comes near her again. Marco raised an eyebrow and asked whether he should tell Kozlov where the money came from. "No," Dominic said, staring out the window at the lights of Chicago flickering below like a sea of stars. "Do not let her know. She would refuse it if she knew it was from me." Marco nodded without further questions. He had followed Dominic long enough to know when silence and obedience were required. 2 days later, Viktor Kozlov received a visit from 3 men in black suits. There were no threats and no violence. They simply placed a briefcase containing $80,000 in cash on the table and told him Elena Ward's debt had been paid in full. Kozlov, ruthless and greedy as he was smart enough not to ask who stood behind it. He took the money, struck Elena's name from his ledger, and ordered his men never to go near her again. A week later, while Elena was working the night shift at the clinic, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered with the constant vigilance of someone used to living in fear. But instead of the familiar, threatening voice of Kozlov's men, she heard a polite, unfamiliar voice informing her that the call was on behalf of Mr. Kozlov, and that her debt had been fully settled, and she no longer owed them anything, and, wishing her good luck before the call ended, Elena stood there with the phone still pressed to her ear, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The debt was paid, $80,000. Who and how? And then she understood there was only one person with the money, the power, and the reason to do this: Dominic Vittorio. Elena did not know what she felt. Relief at no longer living in fear, Anger that he had done this behind her back, or something else she did not dare name. She only knew she needed to see him, to look him in the eye and ask why. The next day, Elena went to Dominic's office, a luxurious high-rise in downtown Chicago disguised as an investment firm. She passed the security in the lobby by saying she was Mr. Vittorio's private nurse, and to her surprise they let her through without further questions. Perhaps Dominic had given prior instructions. She pushed open his office door without knocking. Dominic was seated behind his desk and looked up as she entered. He showed no surprise, as if he had known she would come. "I told you," Elena began, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "I do not need your money." Dominic stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. "You did not take the money," he said calmly, "but I cannot allow the woman who saved my life to be threatened by a loan shark. That is a matter of honor." Elena let out a short, humorless laugh. "Honor? You are a mafia boss. You kill people. You traffic in things that ruin lives. And you talk to me about honor?" Dominic did not get angry. He only looked at her with gray eyes, deep and unreadable. "Yes," he said slowly, "I am everything you just said. But even a mafia boss has principles, and one of mine is never to owe anyone. You saved my life. I must repay you. That is how my world works." Elena searched his eyes for deception or calculation, but found none. Only a rough, unvarnished honesty that left her even more unsettled. "I do not want to owe you," she said, her voice softer now. "I do not want any connection to your world." "You do not owe me," Dominic replied. "This is me settling my debt to you, not the other way around. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to see me again, if you do not want to. Consider us even." Elena stood there, unable to speak. She had prepared 100 words to scold him, to refuse him, to push him out of her life, but faced with that calm sincerity she found herself wordless. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating like the air before a storm. Elena stood facing Dominic, trying to find the words to say, but everything she had prepared seemed to dissolve in the calm steadiness of his gray eyes. She had come here intending to scold him, to push him out of her life. Yet now all she felt was exhaustion. Exhaustion from fighting the entire world, exhaustion from carrying everything alone, and exhaustion from not understanding the man standing in front of her. "You really want to repay me?" Elena finally spoke, her voice no longer sharp but stripped down to bare honesty. Dominic nodded. "Say it. Anything." Elena looked straight into his eyes, her deep brown gaze cutting through every mask he had built over the years. "Do not repay me with money," she said, each word slow and deliberate as if carving them into stone. "Become someone worth saving." Then she turned and walked out of the office without looking back, without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Yet to Dominic it sounded like thunder. He stood there alone in the vast room with its expensive furnishings and panoramic view of Chicago. And for the first time in his life he felt small, become someone worth saving. The words echoed in his mind, repeating like a melody he could not silence. Dominic walked to the window and looked down at the city below. He had built this empire from nothing, had climbed to the top of the underworld through blood and tears and ruthlessness. He had money, power, and the fear of thousands. But was he worth saving? 2 years earlier, Elena had told him that no one needed him. That sentence had haunted him for 2 years, though he had tried to bury it beneath work and power to fill the void. Now she had spoken another sentence, one even more painful because it was not a truth about the present, but a challenge to the future. Become someone worth saving. Dominic thought about his life, about the people he had killed directly or indirectly, about the families he had destroyed through drugs and gambling and loan sharking, about Sophia, the little sister for whom he had devoted his life to revenge. But would Sophia be proud of the man he had become? He remembered Sophia's eyes when she was alive, clear and hopeful, the eyes of a 12-year-old girl who believed her brother was a hero. If Sophia were still alive, if she could see him now, what would she think? Would she be proud that he had avenged her? Or would she cry because he had become a monster? Dominic closed his eyes, and behind the darkness of his lids he did not see the faces of enemies who had died by his hand. He saw Elena's face, weary and gaunt, yet unbroken. He saw Lily's face, the 5-year-old girl sleeping in a van clutching a battered teddy bear. He saw Sophia's face, eyes clear and full of hope. All 3 women, each in her own way, were asking him the same question. Who are you? Who do you want to become? Are you worth saving? That night Dominic did not sleep. He sat in the darkness of his luxurious penthouse, looking out over the city of Chicago as it slowly drifted into sleep. And he thought about Elena, about Sophia, about the man he had become, and the man he might become. For the first time in his life, Dominic Vittorio did not know what to do. He had always had answers, always known the next step, always controlled every situation. But this question, the one Elena had thrown in his face, he had no answer for. Become someone worth saving. How does a killer become worthy? How does a mafia boss reclaim a soul he sold long ago? Dominic did not know. But for the first time, he wanted to find out. A few days after meeting Elena, Dominic found himself driving through the South Side more often than usual, without any specific reason or business in the area. Yet his hands on the steering wheel seemed to guide him there on their own, toward the area near Marquette Park where Elena's old van was usually parked. He told himself he was only passing by, only checking that she and her daughter were safe, telling himself it was his responsibility since he had pulled her into his world by paying off Kozlov. But deep down he knew it was a lie. He wanted to see her, to understand her, to find an answer to the question she had left him with. That afternoon, Dominic parked his car a few hundred meters from the park, intending to sit for a moment and then leave, but then he saw a small figure sitting on the sidewalk near the van. Lily, the little girl, was sitting alone with her legs stretched out in front of her, a drawing pad resting on her lap, and several worn crayons clutched in her hand, her head bent low as she drew with the fierce concentration of a child completely lost in her own imagined world. Dominic hesitated. He knew he should leave. Approaching Elena's daughter when she was not there was something he should not do, especially given who he was. Yet something held him in place, perhaps the way the child sat there alone, small and fragile against the vast world, perhaps the memory of Sophia, of afternoons, when his little sister had sat drawing just like this before everything was taken away. Dominic stepped out of the car and walked toward Lily, unsure of what he would say or how she would react, a child who had not spoken to anyone in 2 years. How could he communicate with her? Yet his feet kept moving as if they had a will of their own. When he came closer, Lily looked up. Her blue eyes, as bright as a summer sky, met his without blinking. Without fear, without curiosity, only a pure and open gaze, as if she were looking straight into his soul and judging him by a measure only children possess. Dominic sat down on the sidewalk at a respectful distance, so as not to frighten her. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice gentler than any he had ever used in his life. Lily did not answer, of course. She simply looked at him for another moment, and then bent back over her drawing. But she did not shoo him away, did not run, did not seem bothered. She just kept drawing as if his presence were perfectly normal. Dominic sat there silently watching as the picture slowly emerged beneath the waxy strokes. A small house with a red roof and blue windows, a sky with a bright yellow sun, and 3 figures standing in front of the house. A tall woman with brown hair, a small girl with brown hair and a pink dress, and a third figure, taller than the others but without clear details. Lily stopped, studied the drawing, then looked up at Dominic. She tore a small piece of paper from the pad, scribbled something on it in a child's uneven handwriting, and handed it to him. Dominic took the paper and saw 3 words written there: Mommy, Lily, House, with arrows pointing to each figure in the picture. The woman was Mommy, the little girl was Lily, and the third figure, the tall one without details. Dominic pointed at it and looked at Lily with a silent question. "Who is this?" Lily tilted her head and thought for a moment, then took the paper back and wrote one more line beneath the third figure, words that made Dominic stop breathing. Don't know yet. She had drawn a dream family, with her mother, with herself, and with someone she did not yet know. An empty place waiting to be filled. Dominic looked at the drawing and then at Lily and felt something in his chest begin to melt. She did not know who he was, did not know what he had done, did not know how much blood stained his hands. To her, he was just a stranger sitting beside her on the sidewalk on an ordinary afternoon. And perhaps in that purity, in that absence of judgment, Dominic found something he had not found anywhere else: acceptance. Just then, hurried footsteps sounded behind them. Dominic turned to see Elena running toward them, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Lily," she called, pulling her daughter behind her like a mother hen shielding her chick. Then she turned to Dominic, her gaze sharp with caution. "What are you doing here?" Dominic stood up and raised his hands as if surrendering. "I was just passing by. I saw her sitting alone and stopped to make sure she was all right." Elena looked at him, then down at Lily. The child showed no fear or distress. Instead, Lily lifted the drawing and held it up for her mother to see, pointing at the third figure and then pointing at Dominic. Elena looked at the picture, at the faceless third figure, at the clumsy words written by her daughter, "Don't know yet," and she understood. And for the first time since meeting Dominic Vittorio, she did not know what to say. In the days that followed, Dominic began to appear near the van more and more often. He did not speak much, did not ask for anything, did not force Elena to talk to him. He simply came, set a bag of food down beside the van, and left. Sometimes it was sandwiches from a well-known bakery downtown, sometimes hot soup on chilly days, sometimes fresh fruit and milk for Lily. He left no notes, waited for no thanks, only placed the bag down and disappeared like a benevolent ghost. Elena was wary at first. She let the bags sit there for hours, afraid to touch them as if they might explode at any moment. She had lived too long in a world where nothing was given without something being taken in return, so she could not believe that Dominic Vittorio, the infamous Mafia boss, could do anything without a hidden purpose. But then Lily began to wait for him. Every afternoon the little girl sat on the sidewalk near the van with her drawing pad on her lap, blue eyes fixed on the direction from which Dominic usually came, and when his black car turned onto the street, those eyes lit up in a way Elena had not seen in 2 years. Lily did not speak, but she communicated through drawings. Each day she made a new picture and handed it to Dominic when he arrived. A drawing of a cat with bright orange fur, a drawing of a night sky filled with shimmering stars, a drawing of a field of flowers in every color of the rainbow. And always in every picture, there were 3 people standing together: a brown-haired woman, a small girl, and a tall man whom Lily added more details to day by day. At first the man was only a faceless stick figure, then he had black hair, then eyes, then a small smile, as if Lily were slowly seeing Dominic, slowly drawing him into her world, slowly turning him from a stranger into someone familiar. Elena watched all of this with a feeling she could not name. She wanted to drive Dominic away, wanted to protect her daughter from his dangerous world. But every time she was about to speak, she saw Lily's eyes, bright with anticipation, eyes she had not seen since Daniel was alive. For 2 years, Lily had lived like a small ghost, quiet and distant, withdrawn into the shell of pain and silence. She did not laugh, did not cry, did not show any emotion. She merely existed, like a withered flower struggling to survive without sunlight. But now, since Dominic appeared, Lily was changing. She began to smile. Small, hesitant smiles like the first rays of sun after a storm. She began to draw more, pictures bursting with color, instead of the gray, bleak images from before. She began to look at the world with the eyes of a 5-year-old, full of curiosity and hope. One afternoon, when Dominic arrived and set the bag of food down as usual, Lily ran to him and tugged at his sleeve. She did not speak. She simply handed him a new drawing and stood waiting with wide blue eyes for his reaction. Dominic looked at the picture. It showed 4 figures standing in front of a house. A brown-haired woman labeled Mommy, a small girl labeled Lily, a tall man with black hair and gray eyes with no name but an arrow pointing straight at Dominic, and in the corner a tiny figure with angel wings and a smile labeled Daddy in Heaven. Dominic stared at the drawing for a long time, so long that Elena began to worry. Then he knelt down to Lily's level, looked into her clear blue eyes, and spoke in a trembling voice he did not know he possessed. "Thank you. This picture is very beautiful." Lily smiled, a wide, radiant smile, then turned and ran back to her mother. And Elena, standing beside the van watching the scene, for the first time in 3 years did not tell Dominic to leave. 2 weeks passed since Dominic began appearing regularly near the van. 2 weeks of grocery bags, drawings, and quiet moments heavy with meaning. Elena still did not fully trust him and kept a careful distance, but she no longer chased him away. She had seen what he brought into Lily's life, the light returning to her daughter's eyes, the rare smiles, and a connection Elena could not explain. One afternoon, Dominic arrived with something other than food, a box in his hands, not very large, wrapped in pink paper with a silver bow. He knew nothing about wrapping gifts, and Marco had made a store clerk do it for him. And Dominic had felt foolish standing in a toy store among mothers and children, but when he saw a professional children's art set with 96 crayons, 36 watercolors, and a thick sketchbook with high-quality paper, he knew he had to buy it. Lily always drew with old, worn-down crayons so short they were barely holdable. She deserved something better. Lily was sitting on the sidewalk as usual with her old sketchbook on her lap when Dominic approached. She looked up and her blue eyes lit up at the sight of him, then shifted to the box in his hands with a child's pure curiosity. Dominic sat down beside her and placed the box between them. "This is for you," he said gently. Lily looked at the box and then at him as if she did not dare believe it. She had not received a gift from anyone but her mother in 2 years. And even her mother rarely had money for anything beyond the bare necessities. "Go on, open it," Dominic encouraged with a small smile he did not even realize he was wearing. Lily reached out. her tiny fingers trembling as they touched the silver bow. She pulled it loose slowly and carefully as if afraid of breaking it, then peeled away the wrapping little by little until the box beneath was revealed. Lily's eyes widened so much Dominic thought they might spill from their sockets. She stared at the colors, at the 96 crayons lined up in perfect rows with every shade of the rainbow and more, at the gleaming watercolor tubes, at the brand new sketchbook with its sturdy cover and pristine white pages. She did not move or blink. She simply stared as if gazing upon a treasure. Elena stood by the van watching, with her heart tightening. She knew how deeply her daughter loved to draw, and how long Lily had dreamed of a proper art set. But there was never enough money, and food and parking fees and medicine for her mother always came first. The old crayons Lily used were salvaged from a church donation box, worn and broken, yet Lily treasured them like jewels. And now her daughter was holding something more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. Lily slowly set the box down and looked up at Dominic, her blue eyes shimmering not with sad tears but with something else, a pure joy she had forgotten how to feel. And then the impossible happened. Lily opened her mouth and a sound came out. "Thank you." 2 words, just 2 small words, whispered hoarsely like a breath of wind after 2 years of disuse. But they were words, the first words Lily Ward had spoken in 2 years of absolute silence. Dominic froze. He did not dare breathe or move, as if any motion might shatter the moment and make it vanish like a dream. He stared at her with wide gray eyes, not knowing what to say or do. And Elena stood by the van with her hand over her mouth as tears poured down her face. She had waited for this moment for 2 years. 2 years of speaking to her daughter without reply. 2 years of singing lullabies without hearing Lily sing back. 2 years of calling her name without hearing mother in return. And now her daughter had spoken. Not to her, but to a mafia boss she had tried to push out of their lives. Lily was not finished. She stood up, stepped toward Dominic, and wrapped her arms around his leg, a small, brief hug holding everything she could not say. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the drawings. Thank you for seeing me." Dominic bent down and placed one hand gently on Lily's head, touching her for the first time. Her hair was soft beneath his palm, warm and alive, and something inside his chest broke open, not breaking apart but breaking to open, like a hard shell that had encased his heart for 12 years, slowly cracking so something tender and vulnerable inside could finally see the light. That night when Dominic returned to his penthouse, he did not turn on the television, did not check work emails, did not call Marco about family business. He sat alone in the dark, looking out over the glittering lights of Chicago, and thought about those 2 small words, "Thank you." And for the first time in 12 years since Sophia died, Dominic Vittorio cried, not from pain, not from loss, but from something he had forgotten for a very long time: hope. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could become someone worth saving. The next morning, Dominic woke with a resolve he had never known in his life. After crying for the first time in 12 years the night before, he had lain awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and thinking of Lily and those clear blue eyes that looked at him without a trace of fear, thinking of Elena and the woman who had challenged him to become someone worth saving, thinking of Sophia and the little sister he had spent his entire life avenging, without ever asking whether she would have wanted him to become this kind of man, and thinking of himself, of the empire he had built with blood and tears, of the lives destroyed by the drugs he trafficked, of the families torn apart by gambling and loan sharking, realizing that he had become the very thing he once despised, a destroyer of other people's lives. That afternoon, Dominic summoned Marco to his office. Marco entered with a worried expression, standing straight before the desk like a soldier awaiting orders. Dominic did not answer at once. He stood by the window, looking out over the bustling city below, and then slowly turned to face his most loyal lieutenant, and said calmly but firmly that he wanted to change the way they operated. Marco blinked and asked what kind of change. Dominic drew a deep breath as if preparing to leap into a bottomless abyss, and said there would be no more drugs, no more loan sharking, no more violence except in self-defense, that he wanted to transition the entire family into legitimate businesses. Silence fell so long Dominic could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Marco stood with his mouth slightly open and eyes wide, as if he had just heard the most insane thing of his life. He finally spoke with a trembling voice, asking if Dominic had truly said no more drugs. Dominic confirmed it. Marco protested that drugs made up nearly 60% of their income, and cutting it would cost millions each year. Dominic said he knew. Marco added that loan sharking was how they controlled territory, and without it their influence would weaken. He stepped closer to the desk, his voice hardening. "Boss, you can't just turn a tiger into a house cat. The other families, they smell blood. If we stop biting, they will eat us alive. Everything we built will burn. Dominic repeated that he knew. Then Marco asked almost pleadingly why. Why change everything now after building the empire for so many years and sacrificing everything to reach this position? Dominic looked at the man who had followed him for 15 years, who had killed for him and been ready to die for him, and said quietly that he did not want to look into the eyes of a 5-year-old child and feel ashamed of who he was, that for the first time in his life he wanted to be someone another person could be proud to stand beside, that he already had enough money for 10 lifetimes and did not need more. What he needed was to sleep at night without being haunted by the faces of those he had harmed. Marco was silent as shock gave way to confusion to worry, and finally to something like understanding. He said slowly that it was that woman Elena Ward and asked what she had done to Dominic. Dominic smiled, a sad but peaceful smile, and said she had saved his life, and then demanded that he be worthy of it. Marco sighed and rubbed his forehead, asking what Dominic planned to do since they could not vanish from the underworld overnight, and other families would see it as weakness and attack. Dominic explained they would transition gradually, investing in real estate, construction, restaurants, legitimate sectors, cutting illegal operations step by step, that those who wanted to leave would be given money and allowed to go. Those who wanted to stay and change would be taken care of. That they would retain military strength for self-defense because he was not naive, but they would not initiate wars, expand territory through violence, or destroy innocent lives. Marco studied Dominic for a long time as if searching for the cold, ruthless mafia boss he had known for 15 years. But that man was gone. In his place stood someone who had found a reason to change, and the courage to pursue it. Marco clenched his jaw, looking out the window at the city they owned, wrestling with the order. Finally, he turned back, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. He said he would follow Dominic, that he did not fully understand, but he trusted him and would walk that path with him. Dominic nodded with gratitude swelling in his chest and said thank you, the first time he had spoken those 2 words to Marco in 15 years. That night Dominic drove to the parking lot near Marquette Park without food, carrying only himself and a story he wanted to tell. He found Elena sitting on the van step with Lily asleep inside. She looked up at him without surprise, as if she had known he would come. Dominic sat beside her at a respectful distance and said he was changing, that he was trying to become someone worth saving. Elena looked at him with deep brown eyes in the dim streetlight and said nothing, only nodded once, a small gesture holding more than words ever could, and in that moment beneath the Chicago night sky, 2 people from entirely different worlds found common ground, hope for a better future. 1 week after that night, Dominic made an offer Elena had not expected. He wanted to take her and Lily to his penthouse, not to display his wealth, but to show them the Chicago night sky from above. Elena refused at first, her defenses still strong after years of living on alert, but Lily overheard the invitation, and her blue eyes lit with an anticipation Elena could not bear to extinguish, and for her daughter's sake she agreed. Dominic's penthouse sat on the top floor of a downtown Chicago tower with a sweeping view of the entire city, and when the elevator doors opened and they stepped inside, Elena had to school her face against surprise. The space was vast with high ceilings, polished wood floors, and enormous glass walls overlooking a sea of lights below. Yet something about it felt strange. Too empty, too cold. There were no family photos, no mementos, no signs that a real person lived here. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Lily noticed none of that. She ran straight to the glass wall and pressed her face to it, eyes wide as the city shimmered below. The lights of Chicago reflected in her blue eyes like millions of tiny stars, and she began to draw immediately, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the new art set Dominic had given her, trying to capture the whole night sky on paper. Dominic led Elena out to the balcony, a wide open space with comfortable seating and an unobstructed view. The night breeze carried a hint of autumn chill, but not enough to bite. They stood side by side looking down at the city, and for the first time since meeting each other, the silence between them was not tense. "Are you lonely?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice as light as the wind, living alone in a place this big. Dominic did not answer at once. He stared into the distance where tall buildings blinked like beacons in a dark sea. "Every day," he finally said. "For 12 years, this apartment could hold dozens of people, yet no one has ever lived here but me." He turned to her, gray eyes deep in the soft glow of the lights. "But lately, since meeting you and Lily, it has felt less so." Something tightened in Elena's chest. She understood that loneliness, the feeling of living in a world where no one truly sees you. She had lived that way for 2 years since Daniel died. "Me too," she whispered, "lonely. Even with Lily beside me, even loving her more than my own life, there are nights when I still feel like the only person in the world." They stood in silence for a moment, but it was the silence of two people who understood each other and did not need words to fill the space. Then Elena continued, her voice trembling as she opened herself in a way she had not since Daniel's death. "After Daniel died, I built a wall around myself. I thought if I let no one in, I would never be hurt again. But that wall also kept me from feeling anything. I existed, but I did not truly live." Dominic nodded. "I understand. After Sophia died, I did the same. Only instead of building walls, I turned myself into something no one dared approach. I thought fear would protect me, but it only made me lonelier." Elena turned to him, and in that moment she did not see the notorious Mafia boss of Chicago. She saw a man who had lost too much and was trying to find himself again. Just like her, inside the living room, Lily had fallen asleep on the floor, crayon still in hand, her half-finished night sky beside her. Dominic gently lifted the child, laid her on the sofa, and covered her with a light blanket. Elena watched and felt her heart soften in a way she could not control. When they returned to the balcony, Dominic reached out and took Elena's hand. No words, no explanation, just the gesture. And Elena did not pull away. She let her fingers intertwine with his, warm and steady, and they stood there in silence, watching dawn begin to blush over the Chicago horizon. Two people long accustomed to darkness, welcoming the light together for the first time. Happiness in Dominic Vittorio's world had always been as fragile as morning dew, beautiful for a moment and gone when the sun rose. And now the sun had risen, because the Moretti family, the ones who had ambushed Dominic in the dark alley that night, had never stopped watching. They had believed Dominic was dead, had celebrated their victory, had begun dividing the territory of the Vittorio family among themselves. But then rumors spread that Dominic Vittorio was still alive, that he was changing, that he was weakening, that he was losing his fangs, and worse than that, he had a weakness. A woman and a child. Lorenzo Moretti, the head of the rival family, was an old fox who had survived 3 interfamily wars and knew that the fastest way to destroy an enemy was not a frontal attack, but a strike at what he loved most. 12 years earlier, Dominic had learned that lesson when he lost Sophia, and now Lorenzo intended to teach it to him once again. The night of reckoning came on an ordinary Wednesday. Elena was working the night shift at the clinic as usual. Lily was asleep in the van with the doors locked tight, her old teddy bear in her arms and the new art set beside her. Recently, Elena had begun to feel safer, had begun to believe that perhaps life was finally improving. She was wrong. At 2 a.m, 2 black trucks pulled up beside the van. 4 men got out, moving fast and silent like ghosts. They broke the lock in less than 10 seconds, and before Lily was fully awake, a hand covered her mouth, a cloth soaked with anesthetic pressed over her nose, and her world dissolved into darkness. When Elena finished her shift and returned to the parking lot at 6 a.m, she knew instantly that something was wrong. The van door stood wide open, the wind whipping the curtain inside. Her heart clenched, and her legs began running before her mind could catch up. "Lily," she called, her voice shaking. "Lily, where are you?" There was no answer. The van was empty. The old teddy bear lay discarded on the floor, the art supplies scattered everywhere, and on the front seat lay a single white piece of paper. Elena picked it up with hands trembling uncontrollably. The letters were printed, cold and impersonal. "Vittorio has 24 hours to surrender. If not, the girl will die like his sister." Elena's world collapsed. She stood there in the empty parking lot under the pale dawn and felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Lily, her daughter, the only child she had left in this world, the child she had promised Daniel she would protect at any cost, had been taken because of her, because of Dominic, because of the damned world she had tried to avoid, but which had found her anyway. Elena did not cry. She had no time to cry. She shoved the note into her pocket, jumped into the van, and drove like a madwoman toward downtown Chicago. She did not know Dominic's home address, but she knew his office building. She would knock on every floor if she had to. She would do anything to get her daughter back. Dominic was sitting in his office, reviewing the business transition plans Marco had prepared when the door burst open and Elena stormed in. Her face was white as paper, her brown eyes bloodshot and wild, her body shaking as if she had just run a marathon in freezing weather. "They took Lily," she said, her voice breaking apart. "They took my daughter." She threw the note onto Dominic's desk. "This is your fault. All of it is your fault." Dominic picked up the paper, read the words, and felt as if a knife had been driven straight into his chest. Moretti, they had found Elena and Lily. They had done the one thing he feared most, turning the people he cared about into targets. History was repeating itself. 12 years earlier, he had lost Sofia the same way. His little sister kidnapped and killed simply because she was Dominic Vittorio's sister. He had spent 12 years exacting revenge, killing everyone responsible. But Sofia never came back. And now Lily, the 5-year-old girl with clear blue eyes and rare smiles, the child who had drawn him into her family picture, who had spoken her first 2 words in 2 years to him, was in the hands of murderers. Dominic stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of Elena. She was crying now, angry, desperate tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched into fists, as if she wanted to strike him but lacked the strength. He took her by the shoulders, looked straight into her eyes, and spoke with the greatest certainty he could summon. "I will find Lily. I promise you. This time will be different. I will not lose her the way I lost Sofia. Even if it costs me my life, I will bring your daughter back." Elena looked at him, her tear-filled brown eyes searching for any sign of deceit, any hollow promise, but she found none. Only determination, fear, and a pain only those who have lost someone they love can understand. Dominic turned to Marco, who had rushed in at the noise. "Mobilize everyone, find out where Moretti is holding the child, and contact Lorenzo. Tell him I am willing to trade my life for the girl." Marco hesitated. "Boss, you cannot." "Do it," Dominic cut him off, his voice cold as steel. "This is an order." When Marco ran out, Dominic turned back to Elena. Her legs gave way and she collapsed, and he caught her before she hit the floor. They sat there on the polished floor of the luxurious office, 2 people facing their greatest fear, praying that this time fate would not be as cruel as it had been 12 years before. Elena did not sit still and wait. She could not. The blood of a mother and the instincts of a combat medic who had survived 3 battlefield deployments would never allow her to remain helpless while her daughter was in enemy hands. While Dominic and Marco mobilized the Vittorio family, Elena moved quietly on her own, drawing on skills from her military years. Surveillance and reconnaissance training she had believed long buried. She began with the van, searching for any clue the kidnappers might have left behind. A small scrap of paper under the seat bearing the logo of a freight company in the southern outskirts of Chicago, a distinctive engine oil stain on the floor, the kind used only for heavy trucks, and most importantly a strand of red industrial yarn caught on the door frame, the type commonly used in old warehouses. Elena put the pieces together. She went to the freight company posing as a job seeker and asked questions about local storage facilities. An elderly employee unknowingly mentioned an abandoned warehouse in the southern industrial zone that had recently been rented by unknown parties. By the time Elena found the location, dusk was falling. She did not tell Dominic, did not call Marco, did not wait for backup. Every second was another second. Lily was in danger, and Elena could not endure that. She was a mother, and she would save her child herself. The warehouse was an aging red brick building, standing alone in a deserted industrial area, windows boarded up, weeds growing knee-high, and a black truck parked behind it, exactly matching the oil trace from her van. She had found the right place. Elena moved through the shadows, using every concealment technique the military had taught her. She found a small broken window at the back, wide enough for her slight frame to slip through. She crept inside, heart pounding like a war drum, while her hands remained steady. The interior was dark and reeked of damp decay. She pressed herself to the wall, let her eyes adjust, then advanced toward a sliver of light leaking from a doorway at the end of the corridor. She heard male voices, mocking laughter, and then her heart clenched at the sound of a child's muffled sobs. "Lily." Elena peered through the crack. In a small room lit by a dangling bulb, Lily sat on a chair, hands bound behind her, blue eyes swollen from crying. 2 large men stood guard, one smoking, the other checking his phone. No one else. Elena assessed the scene as she had been trained. 2 targets, one armed with a pistol in a hip holster, the other carrying a folding knife. She had no weapon, but she had surprise and the desperation of a mother. Sometimes that was enough. She took a deep breath, kicked the door open, and charged. Everything happened in seconds. The smoking man never reacted, before Elena struck his throat with a precise blow taught by the army, dropping him unconscious instantly. But the second man was faster than she expected. He drew and fired. The bullet tore through Elena's left shoulder, pain like fire exploding through her body. But she did not stop. She had endured worse on the battlefield and kept fighting. She kicked the gun from his hand, lunged forward, and drove her weight into him. His head slammed into the table edge with a sharp crack, and he went still. Elena staggered upright, blood pouring from her shoulder, soaking her shirt. She ran to Lily and tore at the restraints with trembling hands. Lily looked at her with terrified blue eyes, then flung herself into her mother's arms, clinging as if afraid she would disappear. "Mommy," she whispered hoarsely. Mommy came. Elena held her as tears streamed down her face, the pain in her shoulder fading before the overwhelming relief of having her child back. But she knew they were not safe yet. She tried to stand, shielding Lily with her good arm, but she had lost too much blood. Dizziness surged, her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, still holding Lily tightly to shield her from impact. At that moment, the main doors burst open. Dominic stormed in, followed by Marco and dozens of Vittorio men. They had tracked Elena's phone and raced against time. Arriving just in time, Dominic saw Elena on the floor, blood pooling beneath her. Lily curled in her arms. His heart stopped. He rushed to her, dropped to his knees, and lifted her head. "Elena," he said, his voice shaking. "Look at me, are you all right?" Elena opened her eyes, brown eyes blurred from blood loss yet flashing with relief when she saw him. "I saved her," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Lily is safe." Dominic looked at Lily, sobbing quietly, clutching her mother, then back at Elena, the woman who had stormed an enemy stronghold alone to save her child, lying in her own blood, thinking only of her daughter. "Why did you not wait for me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do this alone?" Elena looked at him gently despite the pain. "Because I am her mother," she answered weakly. "That is my job." Dominic lifted Elena into his arms, ordered Marco to call an ambulance, and ran outside with her as Lily ran beside them, gripping her mother's hand. And in that moment, beneath the fading Chicago sunset, Dominic swore to himself that he would never allow Elena and Lily to be harmed again, no matter the cost. Elena was taken to the finest private hospital in Chicago, where Dominic ensured she received the best possible medical care. The bullet was removed, the wound was stitched, and the doctors said she was very lucky that it had not struck any vital organs. But she had lost a great deal of blood, her body already weakened by 3 years of hunger and exhaustion, and she would need time to recover. Dominic did not leave the hospital. He sat in the chair beside Elena's bed day and night, rising only when necessary, eating hurried meals Marco brought to him, and refusing every business call. The Moretti family had been defeated during the rescue. Lorenzo Moretti was dead after the gunfight, and the rest had fled or surrendered. But Dominic did not care. The only thing that mattered to him was the woman lying in the hospital bed with a pale face and white bandages wrapped around her shoulder. Lily was there as well, refusing to leave her mother's side even for a moment, sitting on the bed beside Elena with her small legs dangling, clutching her mother's hand as if afraid that letting go would make her disappear. She had begun to speak more since that night, one word at a time, hesitant and hoarse, but each word was a miracle Elena had waited 2 years to hear. 3 days after the surgery, Elena fully woke. She opened her eyes and saw Dominic sitting beside the bed, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. Yet his gray eyes lit up the moment he saw her awake. Then she saw Lily curled beside her, sleeping soundly with her thumb in her mouth like a baby, and tears streamed down Elena's cheeks before she could stop them. "How long have you been here?" she asked in a rough whisper. "Since the beginning," Dominic replied, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And I will stay until you leave this hospital, and after that as well, if you will allow it." Elena looked at him, her brown eyes filled with tears that were no longer born of sorrow. She remembered everything: the first night at the clinic when she saved his life, the encounters that followed, Lily's drawings, the night in the penthouse beneath the Chicago sky, and the moment he stormed the warehouse to save her and her daughter. He had changed, she realized. He was no longer the cold Mafia boss she had met in a bar 3 years earlier. He had become someone else, someone she could trust, someone she could love. The thought startled her, but she could not deny it. Just then Lily woke, sat up rubbing her eyes, and saw that her mother was awake. The blue eyes widened and filled with joy, and then the miracle happened. "Mommy," she said, her voice still hoarse but clearer than ever. "I love you. Please do not leave me." Not 2 words, not broken whispers, but a complete sentence. The first full sentence Lily had spoken after 2 years of silence. Elena pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly despite the sharp pain in her shoulder, and cried, crying from happiness, from relief, from finally hearing her child's voice again. "Mommy will never leave you," she whispered into Lily's ear. "Never." Dominic stood up, intending to step outside to give them privacy. But Lily looked up at him and reached out with her small arm. "Uncle Dominic," she called, her speech clumsy but full of affection. "Stay." Dominic froze. "Uncle. Not sir, not stranger, but uncle. Family." He looked to Elena as if asking permission, and Elena nodded with a small smile. Her first since entering the hospital. Dominic sat back down and Lily reached out and held one of his fingers with her tiny hand. They sat there, the three of them, in a hospital room filled with morning sunlight, and Dominic felt something he had not felt since losing Sophia. Family. He had a family. That night when Lily slept soundly on the extra bed the hospital had brought in, Dominic sat beside Elena. They whispered in the darkness about the past, the present, the future, and finally Dominic said what he had long wanted to say. "You saved me," he whispered. "Not only that night at the clinic, but every day since. You gave me a reason to change, a reason to live, a reason to become better. I do not know if I am worthy of you, but I know I do not want to lose you." Elena took his hand, her brown eyes shining in the dim light. "You walked through the wall I built around myself," she replied softly, "not with money, not with power, but by staying when I did not ask, by seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself." She paused and then added, her voice trembling slightly, "I think I have loved you for a long time. I was just too afraid to admit it." Dominic leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, and they stayed there in a moment of quiet peace, two people who had walked through hell and found each other on the other side. 1 year later, on a beautiful spring morning in Southside Chicago, a place that had once been one of the most dangerous areas in the city, was now witnessing something no one had ever thought possible. Hundreds of people stood before a newly constructed building with a bright facade and large windows welcoming the sunlight. Above them, a large sign read, "Sophia Ward Community Center," a name formed from two people who had passed on. Sophia Vittorio, the little sister Dominic had lost 12 years earlier, and Daniel Ward, the husband Elena had lost 3 years earlier. Two souls and two sorrows now woven together into a symbol of hope and healing. The center offered free medical care, psychological counseling for traumatized children, and support for families of veterans. It was a dream Elena had carried in her heart for a long time, and Dominic had turned into reality with every resource he possessed. The crowd included doctors, nurses, veterans with weathered faces, young families with small children, and children with curious eyes. They came not because of Dominic Vittorio, the name that once made all of Chicago tremble, but because of what he was doing now, and the change they had witnessed over the past year. Elena stepped onto the stage and Dominic almost did not recognize her. She was no longer the gaunt woman with deep dark circles under her eyes he had met in that shabby clinic night. She had gained weight, her skin was healthy and warm, her brown hair fell softly over her shoulders, and her eyes, those brown eyes that had once held so much pain, now shimmered with joy and peace. She wore a simple light blue dress. On her chest still hung the necklace with Daniel's wedding ring, but beside it now was another ring, the engagement ring Dominic had given her 3 months earlier. 1 year ago, Elena began. Her voice carried clearly through the speakers. "I almost lost everything. I lived in a van with my daughter, drowning in debt, with no faith left in anything. Then I met a man bleeding on an examination table in a rundown clinic. I saved his life, but in truth he was the one who saved me." She looked down at the front row where Dominic sat with Lily on his lap. "He taught me that it is never too late to change, that even the most lost among us can find the way home, that healing is not only for wounds of the body but also for wounds of the soul." Elena stepped down and Dominic rose, lifting Lily with him. He walked onto the stage with confidence but without the coldness he once carried, dressed in a simple black suit with no expensive watch and no trace of a powerful crime lord. He was simply a man trying to become a better version of himself. "I once believed money could buy everything," Dominic said, his voice low and steady. "I was wrong. There are things money can never buy. Forgiveness, love, redemption, those must be earned through change, through action, through becoming someone worthy." He looked down at Lily in his arms, now 6 years old, her brown hair braided neatly, her blue eyes bright, and on her lips a smile no one believed they would see a year ago. "And I was lucky enough to have 2 people who gave me that chance." Then it was Lily's turn. She stood before the microphone, so small before a crowd of hundreds yet not afraid. Her clear voice rang out, word by word, slow but strong. "My daddy went to heaven. I was very sad. I did not want to talk anymore." The crowd fell silent. Then she continued, "But Uncle Dominic came. He gave me colors. He showed me the sky, and Mommy smiled again." Lily looked up at Dominic. "He is not my daddy, but he is my family." The entire hall was in tears. Applause rose, not loud but gentle, full of emotion and respect. Dominic lifted Lily, one arm holding her close, the other hand holding Elena's. They stood there together before the morning light streaming through the glass doors of the center, and Dominic knew this was the moment he had waited for his entire life. Not power, not wealth, but standing beside those he loved, seeing them happy, and knowing he had helped make that happiness possible. After the ceremony, Dominic and Elena stood on the balcony of the center, looking down at the neighborhood slowly changing. Lily was playing with other children in the yard, her laughter echoing in the air. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked softly, squeezing his hand. "Giving up everything to do this?" Dominic smiled, a smile he had forgotten how to wear 1 year earlier. "I did not give up. I transformed. The money is still there, but now it is used to build instead of destroy, and I gained more than I ever had before." He turned to her, his gray eyes warm. "I have a family. I have you. I have Lily. That is all I need." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, and they stood there in peace, watching the sun rise higher over the Chicago sky. The last drawing Lily made that day showed 4 figures. Mommy with brown hair and a radiant smile, Lily in her favorite pink dress, Uncle Dominic with gray eyes and a large hand holding theirs, and in the corner a small angel with white wings and a gentle smile. Beneath it, in clumsy handwriting, were the words, "Daddy in heaven." This is a story about a woman who lost everything but never gave up, about a man who lived in darkness but found the light, about a little girl who was silent for 2 years and finally found her voice, and about the power of love, forgiveness, and the belief that anyone can change if they are brave enough to try. The lesson of this story for all of us is that no one is born perfect, no one lives without pain, but it is how we face adversity that defines who we are, that compassion is not weakness but the greatest strength of humanity, and that sometimes the people who most need saving are the very ones who appear to save us. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the emotional stories we bring to you each day. Please like and share this video with those you love, so the message of love and hope can spread further. We would truly love to know how this story has affected you. Have you ever met someone who changed your life in a way you never expected? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We read every comment and look forward to hearing the stories straight from your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish all of you watching good health, joyful days, and peace in your lives. Always keep faith in life and spread love to those around you. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again in the next video.